I worked in retail for 37 years. Now that I'm retired, I find myself being asked the same question over and over again. So, who was the worst customer you ever had to deal with? There's fierce competition. Retail is every bit as bad as you've heard. But I always answer with the same customer. A few years ago, some self-important prick in a suit waltzed into my store, phone clamped to his ear. No doubt you've met people like him yourself. He strolled around as if he owned the place, and the rest of us were inconvenient at best, and intruders at worst. He spent about 5 minutes in the middle of one aisle, blocking a woman with a stroller who was too polite to force her way past. When he finally got to my till with various snacks, a few bottles of beer, and a newspaper, he didn't even look at me. It was rude, but it happens all the time, and it was nothing I couldn't handle. It was what came next that caught me off guard. "No idea, mate. Ours sent a nowhere," he was saying into his phone, making no attempt to lower his voice. "You should see them though, bloody hell. Whole town's inbred. I'm at a shop at the moment. The cashier is full on cow." Yes, he was talking about me. While stood in front of me, while I was scanning through his items, he was loudly calling me a cow to his friend and anyone else who cared to listen. So I stopped scanning his items. After a few moments, he noticed. "What?" he snapped. I calmly explained to him that he needed to apologize for what he said. I explained that it was rude to insult people, especially those actively doing you a service, and if he didn't want to apologize, he would have to leave. He looked at me, and then he spat in my face. That's right, he spat in my face. It shouldn't be hard to understand why he is my choice, beating out all the other creeps and scumbags and shoplifters I had to suffer through the many years of my career. Whenever I'm asked, whoever I'm asked by, I always say he was the worst customer I ever had. But that's a lie. The story of my real answer is one I don't like to tell. In fact, I've only ever told it once. But in my silence, it plays over and over again in my mind, and I have to share it and hope that I will finally be able to move on. My worst ever customer. He shuffled in on a cold February morning, an old man in a long, dirty coat. I use the word old, but I'm not actually sure that he was old. He had that haggard, worn sort of look that could appear as easily on any struggling 30-year-old as it could a resilient 90. Whatever age he actually was, he looked as though life had chewed him up and spit him back out. I felt sorry for him. "Good morning," I said, trying to put on a cheery smile. He didn't seem to hear me, or in any case, he wasn't interested. He walked, chin down and feet barely leaving the floor, straight over to the cigarette stand opposite of the tills. With a shaking hand, he reached out and picked up a packet of 20. His fingers were almost black at the tips, his nails cracked and grimy, and they left smears on the packaging as he twisted it and tore it open, clawing out 2 individual cigarettes. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "You can't smoke in here." He looked over as if he'd only just noticed me, with an expression that was somewhere between tired and terrified. When he didn't respond, I tried again. "You can't smoke in the store, sir. When you've paid for them, you can smoke outside, as long as you're not obstructing the doors." He seemed stunned. He placed the packet back on the shelf and shuffled over to my till. Then, mouth slack and eyes staring unblinkingly at mine, he placed his 2 cigarettes on the counter. We both waited. "That'll be $4.30, I said. He turned back to the shelf in slow motion, then back to me. "That's for 20, he said. "I just want 2. For a moment, I thought he was joking. I raised my eyebrows to give him a "how stupid do you think I am" stare. Honestly, I expected him to either bashfully pay up and grab the rest of the packet on the way out, or else crack and admit one of my colleagues had put him up to it. But he didn't crack. And he didn't look embarrassed. He just kept staring at me. He really seemed to think what he was doing was normal. "Sir, you can't open a packet and only pay for what you take out," I said, emphasizing every word, as if I was speaking to a child. I wasn't trying to be mean. I was starting to think he might have some kind of disability. "If you open a box of cigarettes, you have to pay for all of them." "I don't want all of them," he said. "I want 2. This, I realized, was going to be an uphill struggle. We went back and forth a few times in this way, and when it seemed that he wasn't going to grasp the concept of paying for the full packet, I walked over to the shelf, brought the rest of the cigarettes over, and put them on the counter. "Do you have 430? I asked. His hand drifted to one of his pockets in his coat, and he eyed me warily. "I'm not going to take it from you," I said, trying not to lose my patience. "I just want to know if you can actually afford the whole packet, because if you can't, there's no point us having this discussion, and you won't be able to have any of the cigarettes." He looked down at the counter, peered into his pocket, and then back to me. "I only want 2, he said. At this point, I very politely excused myself so I could go and fetch my manager, who was doing inventory in the storeroom. I brought her up to speed on the situation, and then we both marched back out front, ready to lay down the law. The man was gone. On the countertop, every cigarette remained. "Well, at least he's not a thief," my manager said with a shrug. "If anything, I was just relieved he was finally gone. I was happy to see the back of him and hoped that, after his unsuccessful attempt, he wouldn't come back and try again. 2.5 weeks later, he proved me wrong. I noticed him as soon as he shambled through the door. His hands were thrust deeply into his pockets, his coat even dirtier than last time. He moved as if on rails, heading straight for the cigarettes. "Sir, please remember that you can't." Too late. He had already torn off the corner of the packet and dragged 2 individual cigarettes out. But after that, he didn't come to the counter. He shuffled up to the newspaper stand and browsed them for a moment before reaching out and taking one of the denser broadsheets. Before I could say anything, he leafed through it, grabbed a hold of the middle page, and shook his arm as if he were fighting a swarm of wasps. Sheets of newspaper went everywhere. I didn't say a thing as he approached me and calmly set his single newspaper sheet and 2 cigarettes on the countertop. I could see now which sheet he had chosen. It was the cartoon strips. I laughed. I didn't want to. I was unnerved by this man and more than a little frustrated at the job he'd left for me cleaning up that paper. But it was just so absurd. It was made all the funnier by his complete lack of comprehension at my reaction. Just like with his previous visit, all he did was stare at me, slack-mouthed and distant, as if papering the floor at a local corner shop was part of everyone's daily routine. "Sir," I said, trying to stop myself from smiling, "you can't pay for a single page of a newspaper. You're gonna have to pay for the whole thing." He raised a grubby finger and pointed to one of the cartoon dogs. "Just this," he said. "No, it's gotta be the whole paper and the whole pack of cigarettes. You can't just choose the bits you want and only pay for those." He blinked. It was the longest blink I've ever witnessed. "I don't want all of it," he said. This time my manager came to me. Another customer had seen the incident with the newspaper and fetched her while we were talking. I know this will seem bizarre, but I was genuinely relieved that she actually saw the man this time. Part of me was worried he was a figment of my imagination, and it was good to know that I wasn't going insane. My manager didn't have any more luck than I did explaining the concept of modern shopping, but after about 20 minutes, the man decided to leave without his desired items. Over the next year, we got many visits from this unusual man. He always tried to buy 2 cigarettes, but his other attempts varied. Sometimes he tried to buy a single egg or would open a packet of bread and take out 3 slices. Once, to my incredible annoyance, he tried to buy half a pint of milk by pouring it onto the counter. Sometimes he'd even try to buy items we didn't sell. I remember him walking in with a single shoe and placing it on the counter. And another time, he got to my till with his 2 cigarettes and a single egg, but he added 3 buttons that he pulled out of his pocket. Without fail, whenever we tried to explain that he couldn't pay for items in this way, he said the same thing. I don't want all of it. As I said, this lasted for a year. We talked about taking steps to stop him, but his visits were infrequent, the damage was minimal, and my manager was very reluctant to involve politics. She thought the reputational cost of seeing a police car parked outside might outweigh the damaged goods. We were a friendly local, she insisted, not a hotbed of crime. So we tolerated our strange visitor, even humored him at times. That is, until his final visit to us. He arrived, as always, with his hands thrust firmly into his grimy coat. He was carrying a black plastic bag, which he often did, if he wasn't bringing in another shoe, that is. And so nothing struck me as unusual when he put the bag down to get his cigarettes. And it squelched. It wasn't loud, and I thought I might have imagined it, but when he picked up the bag, I could clearly see that it had left a wet mark on the tiles. He shambled over to my till. 2 cigarettes were placed in front of me, and then the plastic bag. It squelched again. I could see the man staring at me with his mouth hanging wide, could feel his unsteady breaths as it hit my face. I didn't look up to him, though. I was staring at the lumpy, wet bag he had placed on my countertop. Neither of us spoke. Part of me knew what was inside, but another part of me couldn't believe it. Slowly, as if diffusing a bomb, I reached out towards the plastic handles, eased them apart, and peered inside. A single human eye stared back at me, next to 3 severed fingers and a line of intestine. "I didn't want the whole thing," the man said.